It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. First up this week, Hasan Minhaj. We talked in 2016. When was the last time you really confronted someone? Like they're standing in front of you, you have to say something that could make the two of you really uncomfortable, and then you say it. You just say it. My guest, Hasan Minhaj, grew up Muslim and Indian American in the small city of Davis, California, outside Sacramento. He was confronted early on by things that made him uncomfortable, like the time he overheard his dad get a death threat over the phone just after 9/11. He went to school at the University of California at Davis, where he assumed he would study and get a good job, one where he wouldn't spend too much of his time confronting anything. But while he was at school, he ended up watching a friend's copy of the Chris Rock stand-up special, Never Scared, and he saw something that kind of blew his mind. Here was Chris Rock standing on stage, talking about things that mattered to Hasan, confronting them in a way that he hadn't seen before, things like race and what it feels like to be a minority, alienated in the United States. He was so taken by the special, he ended up getting involved in the comedy scenes of nearby Sacramento and then the Bay Area. He met folks like W. Kamau Bell, who would have a major influence on him, and after winning some stand-up contests and a few minor roles on TV, he landed a job at The Daily Show.
Hasan, how are you feeling right now?
Trevor, like many Americans, I have spent the last 12 hours refreshing the Canadian immigration website, which keeps crashing. So I am panicking because melanin doesn't rub off.
Then he got asked to do the White House Correspondents Dinner, the first ever in the Trump era.
You know, a lot of people told me, Hasan, if you go after the administration, it would be petty, unfair, and childish. In other words, presidential. So here we go.
And now he has his own TV show. It's called Patriot Act. You can watch it on Netflix, a fresh episode every week. It's topical, acerbic, and very, very funny.
When Obama took office, he continued Bush-era policies, and his deportation numbers were astronomical. Now, if you're shocked by that, you obviously are forgetting his campaign slogan, "Yes, we can kick out more Guatemalans." You guys never heard the whole thing. You were cheering too loud. You never let him finish.
Now, Hasan, I was just talking with my producer before we went on the air about the last time I saw you, which was backstage at a television pilot.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunately a pilot that didn't go, but it was a very funny show. Yeah. And I had just done a bit on the show, and you were just about to do a bit on the show. And I was sitting back there, you know, behind some curtains looking at some monitors as they went from cue to cue. And I had this thought, which I didn't express to you at the time, which was just kind of looking at you and how handsome you are. I gather from your show that maybe that was something you had to work at.
Yeah. It wasn't until recently where, you know, Indian culture, yoga, all of this stuff, meditation, this stuff has become sort of nouveau riche, chic, cool, cutting edge. That period of time, you were sort of, you know, lumped into, you know, this weird, you know, quickie mart terrorist territory, coupled with the fact that, hey, look, Kal Penn hadn't broken yet, Aziz Ansari hadn't broken yet, Mindy Kaling hadn't broken, Kumail Nanjiani, all these diverse, new, interesting brown voices hadn't broken yet. So just the sheer possibility of me ever being on, like, television, it seemed impossible.
So were you thinking when you were a teenager, when you were in high school, were you thinking, I'm going to get out of Davis? Or were you thinking, I'm going to get some graduate degrees and a good job?
Yeah. I was going to do the interlude tracks on College Dropout. I was going to stack up some degrees and then just get a good job. And so that's really what I thought was going to happen. And it wasn't until we didn't have cable television my freshman year of college at UC Davis. A buddy of mine had downloaded Chris Rock's Never Scared, and this truly dates this. That was 2004 that special came out. I go into his room, and he's watching it, and it clicked for me in that moment. I go, oh, stand-up comedy to me. Oh, it's just funny speech and debate. I had done speech and debate in high school.
That's the dorkiest thing I've ever heard anyone say.
Yeah. But Jesse, isn't it?
Funny speech and debate.
I mean, I see someone do stand-up like, that's totally like integrals. This is my calling. I was like, this is funny speech and debate. And that's when I went on my deep dive and the comedians that I fell in love with were great speech and debaters. I think Greg Giraldo, may he rest in peace, would have been amazing at forensics. And so all those, I started thinking about that. And it wasn't until after doing it 10, 11 years that then, it all clicked together with The Daily Show. But I never thought that was going to happen. I really, I thought I was just going to go to grad school and get a job.
I think that the fact that you started doing stand-up comedy in Sacramento in the Bay Area seems significant to me because it's a scene that is not quite big enough to really break down into sub-scenes. But it is also, it's a place that's full of all different kinds of people and so on and so forth. Yeah. And for that reason, it seems to me like a great opportunity for especially comics of color to learn how to share their experience with those kinds of audiences that we talked about. It's the place where W. Kamau Bell can learn to do jokes for an audience that's 50% white, 20% black, 20% Asian American, 10% Latino, whatever. Right.
Like I can figure out the cognitive framework to make this joke work. I got to translate this experience.
Right. Where Arch Barker and Al Madrigal and whoever the people are all going on together in a row.
Yeah. I mean, I got this awesome experience where I can't believe some of the lineups I got to perform on. Me, Ali Wong, W. Kamau Bell, Al Madrigal, Sheng Wang, Louis Katz, Moshe Kasher. It's like, look at them, it's literally like a walking joke, like a Jew, a black guy, and we'll all walk into a bar. And yet our audience might be an audience in like Fairfield, which is even more like boony-ish than Davis or Sacramento. And, I was doing the thing where in comparison to the Bay Area, Sacramento was a scene that was really kind of looked down upon. Like the comics that came from Sac to SF, even though some of them are great, Mike E. Winfield is a phenomenal Sacramento comedian, a bunch of guys. It was still one of those things where it's like, oh, you're coming from Sacramento. But that idea, I was almost like a road comic even when I was starting in my hometown, because I would drive to San Francisco, drive to Fairfield, drive to Vallejo, drive to Pleasanton, Sunnyvale, the East Bay, everywhere.
You're doing shows in Vallejo?
Yeah. At Pepper Belly's.
Sick-Witted Comedy Club?
Yeah, Sick-Witted Comedy Club. Yeah, owned by E40.
Yeah, it's at Marine World Africa, USA.
Yeah.
It's just some fun Vallejo stuff we know, folks.
Yeah, some just Vallejo inside jokes. You guys will get it. Then hit up the outlets at, Vacaville on the way back. You guys know. You guys that have trekked 80 West.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Listeners overseas. The first time I met you, you were a guest on my comedy show, Jordan Jesse Go.
Yes.
And at the time, the project that you were working on was a documentary series funded, I think, substantially by the Gates Foundation.
Correct.
About comedy around the world.
Right.
You traveled to the absolute furthest points of stand-up comedy.
Yes.
I mean, you went to South Africa. Where did you go?
India and South Africa. Yes.
And I wonder what what you saw when you got there. Because, we think of stand-up comedy as a very specifically American form.
Correct.
So what does it mean to do stand-up comedy 6,000 miles from here?
When I went to South Africa, the thing that blew me away was people's ability to joke and talk about race. There wasn't this idea of – it's amazing. When I got there, the comedians were so envious of our ability to have freedom of speech. They're like, man, we love your guys' podcasts, your roasts, your TV shows, because you guys can just eviscerate your politicians and nothing will really happen to you. In India, that wasn't the case. If you go after certain politicians, they'll slap a lawsuit on you. Cops might show up. Things might happen. Even though it's a democratic country, there's severe censorship in certain capacities. And what I was so amazed by is that these comics in South Africa and India still were taking their shots despite the risks. They were like, no, we got to talk about politics. And what blew my mind is that specifically in South Africa, black comics were on stage making fun of Afrikaners, the people that had literally imprisoned them and put them through apartheid, to their face. And both sides were laughing. And to me, I was like, this type of dialogue is still a niche thing in America. You know, like to have an audience that's that sort of quote unquote woke, where both sides, the oppressor and the oppressed, can sort of like equally throw, you know, barbs and laugh at the ridiculousness of the past. It really was, to me, grounded in this article that I recently saw in the New York Times where it said that 67% of white people refuse to post articles about race on social media. It reminded me of going back, and I'm like, man, that's why I missed doing stand-up in Johannesburg, and I missed doing stand-up in Bangalore and Delhi and Bombay, because I see comics there taking real chances. And I see audiences kind of being down.
Afrikaners are a minority in South Africa.
Correct.
They have to think about their own race every day walking down the street because there's a lot more non-Afrikaner people around.
Correct.
But if I'm walking down the streets of Los Angeles, there's mostly white people, even in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And especially here in Culver City.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to even think of myself as white. I don't even have to think of, I could just be neutral. I'm just a guy, and then other people, race is a thing other people have.
Correct. Yeah, it's just this, I talk about it in the show, in the video game of life. I'm lucky. Like, I think privilege is something that all of us can recognize. My dad is from this generation where he feels if you've immigrated to this country, there's this thing called the American dream tax that you pay. You're basically going to have to endure some level of racism. And if it doesn't cost you your life, you lucked out. And for me, I'm like, no, well, hey, I'm born here. I'm an American. And I was in honors gov. And I learned right here on the American dream receipt that all men are created equal, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like, I shouldn't have to endure any of that. And I kind of explore that idea in the show. Who's more right there, you know? And I've even recognized my own privilege, despite the things that I've gone through growing up. Hey, sometimes I start to think like my dad. Oh, boo-hoo, you couldn't go to the dance with that girl, or you couldn't do this, or they called you a camel jockey. At least your spine isn't getting shattered in the back of a police wagon. And then there's no justice being served to that. So, hey, if this is all you have to pay for being here, you lucked out, Hasan. Be grateful. But then I pivot again, and I'm like, wait, isn't the fight, isn't the struggle, isn't this the uncomfortable conversation that we're having, isn't that where progress happens? Right? If we just stopped at like, well, women can vote now, let's not talk about the equal play, equal pay thing. Let's give it a rest. It's that little, we keep moving the needle forward. So hopefully we can live up to the ideals that we initially wrote.
Let's talk a little bit about you, Hasan, hosting the Radio and Television Correspondents Association Congressional Dinner.
Oh boy, okay.
This is something that you did recently.
Yeah.
So let's take a listen to a clip of you hosting the Congressional Correspondents Dinner. So you've been sort of joking about the presidential candidates. You've been joking about the media.
Yeah.
And now you're turning your attention to Congress.
It's so mean of me to talk about a job that you guys will never have. I mean, every member of Congress wants to be president. Let's be real. There's a senator named Sheldon Whitehouse. That is the most ambitious name for a title you will never have. That's like my name being Hasan, head of Homeland Security. It's just not happening. No. Let's be real. Everybody here in the media, they're hard on Congress. They're hard on you guys. They say you're a do-nothing Congress, but you guys do a lot. You guys do, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You guys go to fundraisers. You guys host fundraisers. You have your staff set up fundraisers for you to host. That's 3 things right there, and that doesn't even include all the time you spent trying to repeal Obamacare or not passing gun control. That's 5 things you guys do.
What I love about that clip is the precipitous decline in laughter through the course of that joke.
I'm listening to this and I'm like, Hasan, you're trying really hard. You can, Jesse, you can hear I'm trying so hard.
Well, as you turn from funny name joke to pointed critique joke, you just hear people going from like, ha, to like, ha, ooh.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where I realized, working at The Daily Show, so many of my friends, whether working at our show or Sam's show or Larry's show, we are all like screaming out into our base of people that will shower us in retweets and love. This was a rare opportunity, like 3 days coming out of Orlando, to speak directly to members of Congress.
I mean, it's a big deal to meet with your congressperson for 10 minutes. Like, if you write a letter to your congressperson's office, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., can I shake hands with you?
Yeah.
If they say yes, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And you got a job where your job is to stand in front of all of them.
Right.
Plus all of the media that cover them.
Correct.
And tell their story.
Correct.
All at once.
Right. And there's another layer to it, is that the people that were watching on, the hotbed that is C-SPAN 3, there was this other layer where I was like, I also have to contextualize this to the people that are watching at home. Why congressional inaction is such a ridiculous notion.
As a stand-up comic, everything that you do is about that audience that's in front of you.
Right.
That's why there's a live audience at Saturday Night Live, and there's a live audience on so many sitcoms.
Right.
It's because when you are doing comedy, you are beholden to those people standing in front of you
Correct.
and getting them to laugh.
Yes.
So it must have taken some psyching up for you to decide, I'm going to do some jokes that are going to be for the people on the other side of the camera.
Yeah. Well,
and when I say on the other side of the camera, I mean at home watching television.
yeah, or that.
I don't think the folks from C-SPAN were super into it.
Right. And they were sitting on the dais. If you
They're
watch,
like, God, I want to get over to book talk.
Right. Look, if you look at the video, I think the clip is on YouTube, but when they actually call me up, you can see I'm visibly nervous because the whole night up to that point, everybody was high-fiving each other. They're like, media, you do a great job. Congress, you do a great job. Now let's give it up for the comedian. And I was like, okay, I'm going to say some stuff, and it might not go over well. And essentially for the first 18 minutes, it was comedy, and I pivot to the last 4 minutes, and it's basically like, look, we don't need your thoughts and prayers.
The first clip that we heard was a ways in
Yeah.
after you've done all of your some Congress people have distinctive manners of dress or funny names.
Sure,
jokes,
yeah.
that you were, that's in the contract.
Right.
And you basically so this all happened just a couple days after Orlando.
Yeah.
And so you have just talked about Congress getting donations from the National Rifle Association.
Correct.
As we head into this clip.
There are 294 sitting members of Congress that have accepted contributions from the NRA, and that doesn't even include the millions of dollars from outside lobbying. So before I get up here in my liberal bubble and I ask for gun control and universal background checks and banning assault rifles, we got to be able to have the conversation. And right now, specifically Congress has blocked legislation for the CDC to study gun-related violence. We can't even talk about the issue with real statistics and facts. So I don't know if this is like a Kickstarter thing, but if $3.7 million can buy political influence to take lives, if we raised $4 million, would you guys take that to save lives?
So in that, I there was a joke that had no laughs.
Correct.
That literally got zero. So
Correct.
that's
I could hear the echo through these headphones. I could hear the echo of that mic. Dude, Jesse, I'm getting nervous for me now, and that was a long time. I'm like, oh man, you're really tanking, buddy. You are tanking up there.
because you're a comedian. You are hired.
Right.
You are hired. You're the entertainment. You're hired. You're there to entertain people.
But also at the same time, I remember I had a really great conversation with my buddy Trevor Noah, who's a former writer for The Daily Show. He's a writer on Any Given Wednesday with Bill Simmons now. Trayvon was telling me, and I remembered the sentence. Trayvon goes, "Dude, you don't want to be Trey Gowdy's friend. You're not there to make Mitch McConnell feel happy about himself. No one ever gets invited back. So if you have an opportunity to say something, and you're one of the rare comics that gets chosen to do this out of the handful that they've asked in the past, say something.
You've gone to both conventions.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like, to some extent, that in some way you are there to make friends, that part of what is within your control is showing enough kindness and empathy toward people who are well-meaning but, ignorant or, and I don't even mean ignorant in a super judgmental way, but just don't have experience dealing with some of the problems of America that you care most about.
Yeah. To me, one of the things that I wanted to add to the Daily Show or even the one-man show is I want to put, even though there's moments where people go, oh, man, props, man, you really skewered them. You really gave it to them. To me, one of the things that I think has been missing from all this dialogue, especially because everything gets reblogged and, so-and-so eviscerates the right and vice versa, is personal sort of empathy and putting your own skin in the game. And when I did this clip at the RNC called Hasan's Farewell Tour, of that if Trump were to become president, I'm going to get deported. So I just wanted to say goodbye to all the delegates from the states that I'll never get to visit. So I went up to, the delegate from Alabama and gave her a big old hug and said bye. I had her sign my American yearbook. I asked her if she would be my pen pal in the camps. I don't know what type of Wi-Fi we'd get there. And so all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to look her face to face in the eye and go, I'm not just some esoteric number that you read in a Breitbart article or that you see in a Facebook status update about how Islam hates us and your brown neighbor has come to kill you. Like, look at me in the eye in this moment, and you don't think I'm a bad person, right? And even their racism was a little adorable. They're like, no, you're one of the good ones.
Your family is Muslim.
Correct.
Are you?
Yes.
What does it mean to you?
That's a really great question. For the longest time growing up, I felt like my childhood and adolescence was really defined by America's war on terror. And growing up as a teenager and then in my 20s, it was like, wow, Islam was looked at as something that was like so foreign and so other and so weird and scary. And it wasn't until, as I got older that I realized, no, like Islam has very deep roots in American history. See slavery. 40% of the slaves were Muslim. I realized how important Islam has been and Muslims have been to America and for America with the death of Muhammad Ali. I think for too long the conversation has been around this idea that you're American or you're Muslim. And Muhammad Ali, and let's not whitewash his legacy, was all of those things. It was amazing. That was amazing. He was a champion. He was a black man. He was a Muslim. And he fought for what he really believed in. And all of those things.
Not just an American Muslim, but an American who chose to be Muslim.
Exactly.
And had to give up a lot to make that
Correct.
choice.
And can you imagine when he announced that my name is no longer Cassius Clay, I'm Muhammad Ali? I mean, it really did shake up the world. It was crazy at the time. And it continued to be throughout his career. But when he passed, I was so proud to be an American Muslim because I was like, this country gives you the potential to do that. Now, it was a huge uphill battle, but he was remembered as a champion and as an American. And it's great that in the wake of his death, also Kaiser Khan at the DNC presented himself on stage and talked about the death of his son, and people have to reckon with that. In the wake of their Islamophobia and their fear, they have to also realize that people like Kaiser Khan have sons that are sacrificing their life for this country.
How do you feel about the relationship between your identity as a Muslim and the fact that I think a lot of people, when they think of Muslim, they're not thinking of a Desi person. They're not thinking of a Southeast Asian person.
Right.
They're not thinking of an African person.
Right.
They're thinking of a very specific...
ISIS.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's literally, 1.8 billion? So it's like 1 out of 4 people in the world. 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 is Muslim. We are here. We've been here. And yet it's believed that it's this margin thing. And I think what's interesting is I felt a lot of solidarity with the Latino community as well. where people feel like, I don't really know a lot of Hispanic people. It's like, no, trust us. They're everywhere.
You know, especially when politicians talk about the Latino community, they talk about it in a monolithic way that does not reflect the Latino community in the United States, much less in the world. Like that, you know, like they talk about the experience of being Latino as though being you know, white-skinned Cuban in New York is the same as being a dark-skinned Salvadoran in Los Angeles, or you know, a Puerto Rican whose family lives in Vermont, or whatever.
Yeah, and it lacks like the nuance and depth and layers. I think the same thing goes for Muslims around the world. It's like, yeah, I do look, my life experience is different from, say, an Egyptian Muslim or a Palestinian Muslim, and we're united through this shared sort of religious experience, but there's nuance and layers to all of that. And look, I think that when politics gets involved, it does really speak to it in like one broad stroke. Right now, you talk about specifically with the Latino community, they just mean Mexican illegal aliens, but they're lumping everybody into that. So it's weird, man.
I imagine it must have been an odd experience, and this is a pure flight of fancy for me. So tell me if this was not your experience. But you know, I'm imagining that, you know, September 11th happened when you were like a teenager, right?
Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah.
So I can only imagine that when September 11th happened, your relationship with all these white people around you really changed in terms of what you were to them. That you know, up until you're 15, you're thinking of your primary point of difference as being the color of your skin, or the fact that you're Indian, or Indian American, I should say. And then, you know, September 11th happens, and all of a sudden, maybe the first category of other that you are is Muslim.
Yeah, that was such a clear shift. And then another thing happened. September 12th, I remember that night, my dad held this like executive meeting at our dinner table. He was like, Hasan, whatever you do, don't tell people that you're Muslim, and don't talk about politics. And I was like, cool, I'm just gonna hide it. Thanks, Dad. Our phone rings. There's these kids, they're prank calling us. I grab the second phone. I'm like running to the second phone. And then these kids are like, hey, you camel jockey, where's Osama? My dad's like looking at me. And he's like, what? I don't understand what you're saying. He's like, I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. No, I'm gonna kill you. Click. Now I'm like freaked out. And I'm also embarrassed because my dad's looking at me, and I'm his son. I'm this guy who can walk two different worlds. I know Desi culture. I know American culture. And I basically watched these kids ridicule and threaten us. And I just let it happen. We sit back down. Foomp, foomp, foomp. I hear these thuds outside. We run outside, me and my dad. The Camry, our car, all the glass is shattered all over the driveway. So I'm running up and down the cul-de-sac, and I'm looking for them. And then I look into the middle of the street, and my dad is just like sweeping up glass out of the street like he works at a hate crime barbershop. Like, oh, the next customers are coming. And he's so calm. Like, he has this sense of calm. I run up to him like, why aren't you mad? Like, what's wrong with you? And he says this thing in Urdu. He's like, Hasan, ye cheeze hoenge? Ye cheeze hoenge? Like, Hasan, these things happen, and these things will continue to happen. This is the price we pay.
You, as a teenager, experienced a really formative incident of racism.
Right.
And that was at like, was it prom?
Yes.
Around prom.
Yes.
So obviously, like the most important part of any adolescence,
sure,
you know,
sure.
Or at least designed to be.
But it was also first love, really.
Right.
It's like the first person I loved, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the denouement of the story is you essentially seeking personal revenge.
Right.
And having to come to terms with reconciliation.
Yeah.
Instead.
Yeah, and realizing that anger and revenge isn't really the solution. I mean, look, I can point to you and say that you're wrong. That doesn't fix the problem at hand. Really, the question of the show is, hey, in the wake of San Bernardino, Orlando, Paris, Could 2016 Hasan Minhaj still go to the dance with 2016 Bethany Reed? And to me, I see the state of the country, and I'm saying that's a 50-50 ball. We're like in the midst of history. Like, this is stuff we're going to tell our kids about. We're going to be in history books. The photos won't be black and white. They'll be in color. But it's like, do we want to tell them that we were on the right side of history?
The photos will be of you. You're very handsome.
Oh, thank you. Right. That would be so creepy if I was like in a scholastic textbook.
The picture on the front of the history book will be you and me together.
Yeah.
And it will say 21st century hero Hasan Minhaj.
Stop it.
And a white guy.
Actually, I hope that photo has both of us with our Jordans next to each other and be like, look.
Yeah, we have not addressed our matching shoes.
We have not
this
even
whole time.
talked about that, man.
So what Air Jordans are you wearing?
I'm wearing the Air Jordan 1 Band. This was the first black and red colorway, the infamous colorway. It's coming out again this September 2nd, but this was the first shoe that, Michael Jordan infamously wore, and the league banned it because it didn't have enough white in the shoe. Very fitting because we're talking about race in the show a bunch.
Should we do a quick knock joke or?
Mm-hmm. So the Panda Bear walks into a bar and he says, "Let me get a Coke and let me get a burger." Guy gives him a Coke and a burger. Panda Bear eats the Coke and the burger. He walks out the door. The bartender goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" The Panda Bear turns around, pulls out a revolver, fires 2 shots into the air. And now he's about to close the door of the bar. Bartender grabs him and goes, "Hey, Panda, you cannot just walk out of my bar like that. Are you out of your mind?" Panda Bear pulls out an encyclopedia, gives it to the bartender and says, "Look it up, buddy." Bartender opens the encyclopedia. It says Panda Bear eats, shoots, and leaves. Jesse, it's been an honor being on this podcast. Thank you so much, man.
Hasan Minhaj from 2016. Patriot Act is on Netflix now. Give it a watch. Also, if you haven't seen his special Homecoming King from 2017, it's wonderful. Go watch it.